Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into something really critical that's been happening in Kenya. We're looking at Saba 2025. You've probably heard about it, this resurgent protest movement. Our mission here really is to unpack it all. You know, the history behind these protests, what actually sparked this latest round, the intense events of the day itself, July 7th, and maybe most importantly, what it all means for Kenya and, well, maybe beyond. We want to pull out the key pieces of information, the nuggets, so you can get a real informed view of what's going on.
Absolutely. And, to really get Saba 2025, you absolutely have to look back. The name itself, Saba, it's loaded with history. It comes directly from July 7th, 1990. Those are huge protests, pivotal, really, demanding multi-party democracy. Back when President Moi was in power, it was a very different Kenya then.
Right. That historical weight is so important, isn't it? It's not just a date.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how it's changed. What started as that specific demand, it's now like an annual thing. A day for civil defiance, but broader now.
Yeah.
Condemning police brutality, corruption, rights abuses, just bad governance in general. Okay, so if we're looking at that whole arc, how did we get here? To this specific point in 2025, what were the triggers?
Well, yeah, the build-up to this year's Saba wasn't sudden. Not at all. There was a definite escalation. You have to go back to at least June 2024. Remember the huge protests against the finance bill?
Oh, yeah, the hashtag Reject Finance Bill 2024 hashtag was everywhere.
Exactly. And they were met with, well, pretty violent suppression. It even led to that period people call the 7 days of rage. Very intense, deadly even.
And that momentum just carried over. It didn't just fade away.
Didn't fade, no. Maybe simmered, then boiled up again. June 2025 saw another wave. This time, driven a lot by Gen Z, Kenya's youth. They were protesting the rising cost of living, which is hitting everyone hard. But then came a real flashpoint, a tipping point, you could say, the death of Albert Omondi Ojwang. He was a blogger, a teacher, died on June 11th, allegedly while he was in police custody, and it was unexplained.
Ah, Ojwang's death. That seems like it really ignited things, didn't it? Took that simmering anger and just made it explode. You mentioned more demonstrations then, June 9th, June 25th. Setting the stage, really, for Saba itself. You could feel something building towards July 7th, like a deeper anger.
Absolutely. That death became a major rallying cry. It personalized the broader issues of police brutality and lack of accountability.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. The energy building up.
Yeah.
When July 7th, Saba Day 2025, finally arrived, what happened? What did it look like on the ground? Was it just Nairobi?
No, definitely not just Nairobi. That's key. The scale was, well, quite striking.
Yeah.
Protests broke out in, reports say, 17 or maybe 18 counties. So yes, major cities like Nairobi, Eldoret, Nyeri, Embu, Nakuru, but also towns like Kitengela, Kamakunji. It was widespread. And unfortunately, the violence and clashes were widespread too. Very concerning reports came out almost immediately.
Right, and the human cost. When things started to become clearer, what were the first reports on fatalities, injuries? I remember seeing different numbers flying around.
You're right. The figures were inconsistent, which, probably reflects the chaos of the day. And maybe some information control, too. So the UN and the Kenya Human Rights Commission, they reported figures up to 31 deaths across the country. But other sources, police, other monitors, were citing lower numbers, maybe 10 or 11 deaths.
Yeah.
The KNCHR, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, they put out a specific update late that day, around 6:30 p.m., saying at least 10 dead, 29 injured, 37 arrested just by that point.
That's by 6:30 p.m. Okay.
Yeah. And then you had reports of over 500 arrests overall, 107 protester injuries confirmed by some groups. Police reported 52 officers injured too, but really thousands were likely injured nationwide. Clashes, tear gas, even shootings. It was bad.
Those numbers, even the lowest estimates, are stark. So what does this all mean for those on the ground facing that kind of state response?
Well, the police response was undeniably heavy-handed. We're talking use of live ammunition, that's confirmed. Tear gas, obviously. Water cannons. And they physically blocked roads, major roads into Nairobi, trying to stop people joining.
And there were other reports, too, weren't there, about less official tactics?
Yes, very disturbing ones. Reports of plainclothes officers involved, and even claims of, criminal gangs being used to attack protesters. Yep. Which really blurs the lines, makes things even more dangerous and confusing. And then something quite alarming, attacks on hospitals.
Yeah.
Specific reports from Kitengela and Bristol Hospital and Embakasi, looting, vandalism.
Yeah.
Targeting healthcare facilities during unrest is, well, it's a serious escalation.
That's a truly grim picture. So with all this happening, how did the institutions react, both inside Kenya and internationally? What was the fallout in the hair side?
The reactions inside Kenya were pretty mixed, actually. kind of show different facets of the establishment grappling with it. You had the NCIC, that's the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. They condemned the excessive force, called for rights to be respected. But they also mentioned infiltrators spoiling peaceful protests. A bit of hedging there, maybe.
Okay. What about others?
The Motorists Association, interestingly, spoke up. They pushed for respect for Article 37, the right to protest in the Constitution, demanded safe passage for people, protection for services. And the churches were quite vocal. The NCCK, the National Council of Churches, they publicly demanded police restraint, accountability. They even called for repealing restrictive protest laws.
So, demands for accountability there. And political figures.
Speaker Moses Wetangula called for peace, denounced divisive politics. Pretty standard call for calm from a parliamentary leader.
So, those calls for restraint and rights, how did the government's official line stack up against that? Did they echo those calls?
Not really. There was a pretty clear divergence. The Interior CS, Murkomen, who's in charge of security, his stance was very hardline. He actually described the protests as disguised terrorism.
Terrorism, wow.
Yeah, and he defended shoot-on-sight tactics, assured everyone security was on high alert, a very different message. And then you had the Nairobi woman Rep. Pasaris suggesting the protests were funded from outside Kenya, cautioning foreign backers. Adds another layer of that narrative.
Right, the outside influence narrative. That's fascinating, how the world viewed these events. What was the international reaction?
Yeah.
Especially with those contrasting messages domestically.
Well, internationally, the main voices were urging caution and rights protection.
Yeah.
The UN, various human rights groups, they all called on Kenyan authorities to respect peaceful assembly, use restraint. Pretty consistent messaging there.
Any specific countries weigh in?
Canada did, notably. They actually issued a travel advisory before Saba, warning their citizens about potential unrest, travel disruptions, even possible issues with communications. That suggests they saw the potential for serious trouble brewing.
That's significant, issuing a warning beforehand. Okay, so an event like this, it obviously has immediate impacts, but what about the wider ripples, the economic effects, the societal cost?
Oh, the economic fallout was huge. You have to understand, Nairobi alone generates something like 27.5% of Kenya's entire GDP.
Huge chunk.
Massive. And the protests hit 17 counties, which together account for billions of shillings, around 17.2 billion daily in GDP. So when those areas are effectively shut down by lockdowns, roadblocks, businesses closing, plus the looting, it's a massive hit to trade, transport, investor confidence. Everything takes a knock. Public trust, too.
And the human cost, putting it in context, you mentioned the KNCHR figures earlier.
Yeah, the KNCHR put out a broader figure, too. They reported 115 protest-related deaths in Kenya just since June 2024. And they confirmed that 32 of those deaths happened on Saba itself, making it the deadliest single day in this whole recent period of unrest.
32 deaths on one day. That just it underscores the tragedy of it all, the sheer disruption. So if we try to connect the dots here, zoom out a bit, what patterns are we seeing? Are there echoes of the past? What's different this time?
There are definite echoes of 1990. Absolutely. Both then and now, you're looking at major uprisings, protests against what people see as autocratic government, demanding basic democratic rights, dignity. That core is similar.
But it feels different too, doesn't it?
It does. Very different in some ways. The 2025 protests were much more decentralized, hugely driven by Gen Z, as we said, organized largely through social media, WhatsApp, Twitter, TikTok maybe. And crucially, there wasn't one single leader or group directing everything. It was more organic, fluid, focused on immediate grievances, cost of living, police brutality, Ojwang's death. Less about a single political party or figure.
That decentralization, the tech aspect, the Gen Z factor, that really changes the game, doesn't it? How protests work, how the state tries to respond.
Completely. Old tactics of control might not work the same way.
So this raises a really important question, I think. You got this fundamental clash. The government seeing protests as a threat, needing force, and the protesters seeing it as their constitutional right, demanding justice, better leadership. It's a deep divide. Given that tension, what should we be watching for now? What are the key things that will show us where this is heading?
Yeah, that tension is the key thing. So first, accountability, investigations. Will police officers or those alleged vigilante groups actually face charges for Ojwang's death, for the Saba violence? That's critical for trust.
Okay, accountability first. What else?
Second, legislation. Laws around protests. Will we see new, tougher laws introduced? The public order amendments, for example. Or will pressure lead to maybe rolling back restrictions? That's a big indicator.
Right, laws are crucial.
Third, the youth movement. Gen Z. Will they keep up the momentum on the streets? Or will that energy shift, maybe into more formal civic action, political organizing? That transition is key to watch.
The energy needs to go somewhere.
Exactly. And finally, policy. The government's response on the core issues. What will they actually do about police reform, about the cost of living, about corruption and governance? Concrete actions, not just words. Those policy moves will tell us a lot about whether the underlying grievances are being addressed.
Accountability, legislation, youth momentum, and policy response.
Got it. That gives us a clear framework. We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, from the deep roots of Saba Saba, the immediate sparks, the really intense and tragic events of July 7th, and all the reactions and impacts flowing from it. It's clear Saba Saba 2025 is a really complex, really significant moment for Kenya. Thanks for joining us to unpack it all.
My pleasure. And maybe just one final thought for you listening. Consider how these moments of history, like Saba Saba, really change when new generations using new tools, new ways of connecting, when they join the fight for fundamental rights. What could that mean for how governments respond, not just in Kenya, but, well, anywhere where people are demanding change? Something to think about.